Dating as a celebrity is hard enough, but in Korean entertainment, relationships rarely get to stay private, and that's when the real mess begins. One actor reportedly ended a 2-year relationship by text. One actress accidentally accused a complete stranger of being her husband's mistress. And our first couple learned that sometimes you don't need a scandal to lose your relationship. You just need the wrong people to find out about it. Every relationship in the Korean entertainment industry has its fair share of nasty hate comments, but Lee Jae-wook and Karina's took it to another level. They were both at the top of their fields when they met. Karina was the leader of aespa, one of the biggest girl groups in Korea. Lee Jae-wook had built a reputation through dramas like Alchemy of Souls and was quickly becoming one of the industry's most recognizable young actors. They first met in Milan on January 14, 2024, when both attended a Prada fashion show. According to reports, they clicked at the event and continued seeing each other after returning to Seoul. What started with conversations in Milan turned into something more once they were back in Korea. They kept the relationship private. For a little over a month, they were able to date without the public knowing. Then, on February 27th, Dispatch published photos of them together. Suddenly, the relationship they'd been keeping between themselves was everywhere. Both agencies confirmed they were dating almost immediately, which was unusual for a celebrity relationship in Korea. Lee Jae-wook's agency even asked the public to respect the couple and look upon the relationship warmly. The public did the opposite. Most of the backlash landed on Karina. Some fans accused her of betraying them. Others questioned whether she was being irresponsible as the leader of aespa for dating while the group was actively promoting. And then the anger moved beyond social media. A group of fans rented a truck with an electronic billboard on the back and drove it to SM Entertainment's headquarters. The message demanded that Karina apologize to her fans. It even warned that her relationship could affect aespa's album sales and concert attendance. And Karina actually apologized. On March 5th, just days after the relationship was exposed, she posted a handwritten letter on Instagram addressed directly to her fans. She apologized for surprising and disappointing them. She said she knew some fans had been hurt by the news and that she wanted to work toward healing those feelings for dating someone. Meanwhile, Lee Jae-wook said nothing publicly. He continued filming his upcoming project while the relationship remained under intense scrutiny. Then, on April 2nd, the agencies confirmed that the couple had broken up. It had been just 5 weeks since their relationship became public. Lee Jae-wook's agency said he had decided to end the relationship so he could focus on his acting project. It said the two would remain colleagues and continue supporting each other. Karina's agency simply confirmed the breakup. Reports at the time also pointed to the overwhelming amount of malicious comments and public scrutiny surrounding the relationship. So even the explanation for the breakup left room for interpretation. Was it because Lee Jae-wook needed to concentrate on his career? Was the constant backlash simply too much for a new relationship to survive? Nobody outside the two of them could really know. What we do know is in private, they had a relationship. In public, they had a controversy. And 5 weeks after the news broke, it was over. Exactly the outcome some of the loudest fans had been demanding. That relationship was pulled apart by people who had never met either of them. The next one ended with a single text message. Here's a question. What's the coldest way you've ever been broken up with? Because whatever your answer is, Kim Jung-eun found out her 2-year relationship was over the same way you'd find out your food delivery had been delayed. If you've watched Ginny's Kitchen, you know Lee Seo-jin is the deadpan one who complains about everything and is somehow the most likable person on screen. For about a year, a lot of Korea couldn't stand him. And it began like something out of a K-drama. Kim Jung-eun and Lee Seo-jin met while filming Lovers in 2006. When filming ended, Lee Seo-jin called Kim Jung-eun himself and asked if they could start dating. He even appeared on a talk show and sang the drama's theme song to her. She cooked meals for him and brought them to set. They went public, and for 2 years they were one of Korean entertainment's favorite couples. Then, in October 2008, it ended. Not through a messy confrontation, not even a phone call, but by text message. But that wasn't the part that shocked people the most. Kim Jung-eun kept the breakup to herself for almost a month. She'd just started filming a new drama, so she carried on working as though nothing had happened. Week after week, audiences watched her on television without realizing she was hiding a breakup she hadn't even chosen. When she finally spoke, the whole country watched. On the 22nd of November, she sat down with reporters because, as she later explained, she couldn't keep pretending during interviews anymore. She cried through the entire press conference. It felt like being in a car accident she never saw coming, she said, like being shot. The decision hadn't been hers, and she'd had no warning at all. Korea waited for Lee Soo-jin to explain himself. Instead, he disappeared. He flew to Hong Kong, switched off his phone, borrowed a local number so nobody from Korea could reach him, and stayed away for nearly 2 months. He later admitted he had simply run away. While Korea argued about him, Lee Soo-jin stayed in Hong Kong and waited for the storm to pass. 9 months later, he finally broke his silence. And there was no explanation. Instead, he said staying silent was what he believed he should do as a man. If he had wanted to explain himself, he could have done it long ago. There was no point now that everything was over. He would keep the reasons buried in his heart forever. He has since called it the biggest setback of his career. And it came back. In early 2024, an anonymous accusation about an unnamed actor started circulating online. Netizens went looking for a match, decided it might be him, and dug up the 2008 breakup as evidence. His agency had to put out a denial and threaten legal action, 16 years after a text message. Lee Soo-jin is 55 now, and he has never married. In March 2025, he appeared on a YouTube show with Yoo Jae-suk, where someone made an observation that probably crossed everyone else's mind. Going home to an empty house must get lonely. Lee Soo-jin smiled. He said he actually enjoys being alone, and that he'd found enough happiness elsewhere to give that one thing up. Yoo Jae-suk asked if he really meant never. Lee Soo-jin said he had no intention of getting married. Then someone joked that love arrives like a car accident. Lee Soo-jin laughed and said that, at this rate, a car accident was probably more likely to happen to him before he fell in love again. 17 years earlier, Kim Jung-eun had reached for almost the exact same image. She had called the breakup a car accident she never saw coming. For her, it described something sudden that changed everything. For him, 17 years later, it was a joke about how unlikely love had become. And somehow, the same image had followed both of them all the way through the story. That one ended with a text message. This next one ended with a woman saying one word too many. Ga-in and Ji-hoon had already survived 3 years of being one of Korea's most controversial couples. Somehow, it still got worse. Ji-hoon and Ga-in met in January 2014 on the set of one of her music videos. By then, Ji-hoon had moved well past Princess Hours, the drama that made him famous, and spent years rebuilding himself as a serious film actor. Gaeun was the frontwoman of Brown Eyed Girls, the group behind Abracadabra, with a solo career built around doing exactly what people didn't expect from her. They were dating by April and went public in May. For 3 years, on and off, they made it work. And the reason that took work is that Ji-hoon had a conviction. In 2009, he was found guilty of substance abuse. He served his punishment and spent the years afterwards climbing back. By 2017, most people had moved on. Then, one night in June, Ga-in started posting. Not one post, not a vague hint, a series of posts with screenshots attached. She accused one of Ji-hoon's friends of offering her illegal substance and said she had refused. She could not have picked a worse week for it. Big Bang's T.O.P. was already at the center of a national scandal. Prosecutors formally indicted him on the 5th of June, the day after Gaeun's post went up, so her accusation didn't land on its own. Korea was already mid-argument about celebrities and substance abuse, and she had just walked into the middle of it. Then people noticed one sentence that had nothing to do with the friend she was accusing. Gaeun said she was dating a man who had previously used illegal substance. That man was Ji-hoon. She went out of her way to add that he had served his punishment and was living honestly now. But that distinction didn't really matter to the netizens. To them, the important part was that Gaeun had publicly admitted she was dating a man with a history of substance abuse, right in the middle of another huge celebrity scandal. Ji-hoon's old conviction was suddenly back in the conversation. People were questioning why Gaeun was still with him, while others focused on what her comments meant for his career. And the controversy wasn't staying online anymore. Police began looking into Gaeun's allegations, while Gaeun herself was questioned about the posts. What had started as Gaeun publicly calling out something she said had happened to her was now becoming a police matter. Then the attention shifted to the one thing neither of them had actually confirmed. With all of this unfolding around them, Was there any chance Ga-in and Ji-hoon would still be together when it was over? Both agencies went quiet. Ji-hoon said it was difficult to confirm anything about the state of the relationship. Hers declined to comment. Then, on the 7th of July, both agencies confirmed that Ga-in and Ji-hoon had broken up. Neither side ever explained exactly what happened between them. But after 3 years together, a relationship that had survived Ji-hoon's past was unable to survive the mess that came after Ga-in's post. At least that breakup had a clear trigger. The next one had no trigger anybody could point to, and the whole country spent years guessing. Jung-ki and Hye-kyo had the kind of wedding that made their real-life romance feel like the final episode of a K-drama. Then, 20 months later, something went very wrong. If you were watching K-dramas in 2016, you didn't have a choice about descendants of the sun. It was everywhere. The drama turned its two leads into one of Korea's most beloved couples. So when Jung-ki and Hye-kyo announced their wedding, fans were ecstatic. They married at the Shilla Hotel in Seoul in October 2017, in a ceremony attended by stars including Jung Ji-e, Yoo Jae-suk, and several members of Running Man. The images from that day looked almost too perfect. The couple who had fallen in love on screen were now getting married in real life. But the fairy tale didn't last long. There had been rumors for months. Hye-kyo had been photographed without her wedding ring, and reports claimed the couple were spending more time apart. Both were filming abroad at the time, so none of that necessarily meant anything. And the timing of what he'd said a few weeks earlier makes it worse. Jung-ki had turned up at a press conference for Arthdal Chronicles, still wearing his wedding ring, and told reporters that being married had given him peace of mind and that his wife had been very supportive. Then, in June 2019, Jung-ki filed for divorce. The two agencies gave only limited explanations, with Hye-kyo's side citing differences in personality and asking people not to make speculative comments. That was almost impossible for the public to do. With neither side explaining what had happened, the speculation only grew. And then Park Bo-gum got dragged into it. He had recently starred opposite Hye-kyo in Encounter. That was apparently enough for people online to connect him to the divorce. His agency publicly denied the rumors and threatened legal action against those spreading them. The stock market reacted too. Shares in Studio Dragon, the company behind his current drama, fell over 1% in a single day. A marriage ending moved a share price. But by then, the divorce had become something much bigger than the two people actually getting divorced. People picked sides. Rumors became theories. Theories became accusations, and suddenly even people who had nothing to do with the marriage were being pulled into it. Neither Jung-ki nor Hye-kyo ever gave the public the explanation it wanted. 7 years later, they've both moved on. Hye-kyo had one of the biggest resurgences of her career with The Glory, winning major awards and reminding everyone why she had been one of Korea's biggest stars in the first place. Jung-ki, meanwhile, remarried British former actress Katie Louise Saunders in 2023, and the couple now have 2 children. Whatever happened inside the Song marriage, they have never publicly laid it all out. And maybe that's why the speculation never really died. The Song couple tried to keep their marriage and divorce as private as they could. The next 2 couples did the exact opposite. If you wanted to know exactly what went wrong between Hye-sun and Ahn Jae-hyun's marriage, you didn't have to guess. They documented almost all of it themselves. They met while filming Blood in 2015. Dispatch reported on their relationship in March 2016. They married that May, and soon after, they were given their own reality show. She was the more established star, coming off Boys Over Flowers. He had come to acting from modeling. For 3 years, they appeared to be one of those relatively quiet celebrity couples. Then, in August 2019, Hye-sun posted screenshots to Instagram showing her husband asking for a divorce. On the 21st of August, Ahn Jae-hyun broke his silence with a long message giving his side. Hye-sun responded the same day. And instead of simply denying his version, she started going through the divorce point by point. She explained that the settlement money included half of what they had donated instead of spending on a wedding. She wanted compensation for the interior of his current apartment because she had paid for it. And she wanted 30,000 won for every day of their marriage because, according to her, she had done all of the housework. She had also asked for the house. Her explanation was practical. Ahn Jae-hyun had rarely been home even before they separated, she said. So if she was going to live alone anyway, she wanted the house. Then, in September, Dispatch published roughly a year's worth of their private messages, covering the period from late 2018 to the summer of 2019. In one of their final conversations, Koo Hye-sun told him that people like them lived on their reputations and questioned why he was being immature. Jae-hyun asked whether getting divorced meant a person disappeared. He pointed out that he was getting divorced too. She replied that the divorce had been his choice, that she was the one being harmed, and that she would be the one who couldn't work afterwards. "I am the victim," she wrote, "so give me the house." His response was one syllable. Then another person was pulled into the fight. Koo Hye-sun accused Jae-hyun of having an affair with actress Oh Yoon-soo. He filed for divorce days later and publicly apologized to Oh Yoon-soo for dragging her into the controversy. The following month, Koo Hye-sun said through her lawyer that she would counterclaim. She considered Jae-hyun responsible for the breakdown of the marriage and said she would present evidence. By then, their divorce had moved from Instagram to news reports, leaked messages, lawyers, and eventually the courts. The divorce was finalized at Seoul Family Court in July 2020. Neither appeared in person. Their lawyers did. Afterwards, they issued a joint statement wishing each other well and apologizing to the public. Neither of them has discussed the details since. Koo Hye-sun announced she was leaving the entertainment industry in 2019, in the middle of all of it. She eventually went in a very different direction. She enrolled at KAIST's Graduate School of Science Journalism, and in August 2025, she asked the Korean press to stop revisiting the divorce, calling the repeated headlines an act of second harm. Jae-hyun, meanwhile, stayed in entertainment, continuing to act and appear on variety shows. They eventually moved on with their lives. The internet didn't quite move on with them. Koo Hye-sun and Jae-hyun turned their divorce into a public fight between two people who had actually been married. The next one dragged in a stranger who had nothing to do with any of it. Hwang Jung-eum and Lee Young-don's marriage survived one divorce filing. Then, when they tried to make it work a second time, everything got even messier. She married businessman and former professional golfer Lee Young-don in February 2016. Their first son was born the following year, and for a while, the marriage seemed settled. Then, in September 2020, after 4 years together, Hwang Jung-eum filed for divorce. But the divorce never happened. During mediation, the couple reconciled. By late 2021, Hwang Jung-eum was pregnant with their second child, who was born in March 2022. Whatever had gone wrong the first time, they seemed to have worked through it. Until February 2024, Hwang Jung-eum filed for divorce again. And this time, she didn't keep the story between lawyers. She went to Instagram. She posted a woman's photograph and accused her of being involved with Lee Young-don. The post spread quickly, and suddenly thousands of people were staring at a woman's face and reading that she was supposedly having an affair with a married man. Except the woman had nothing to do with Lee Young-don. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't in the entertainment industry. She was a private citizen who had never been part of any of it. And by the time the mistake was clear, her face was already everywhere. She denied knowing him and demanded an apology. Hwang Jung-eum deleted the posts, apologized, and contacted her personally, but the woman wasn't satisfied with an apology. The two sides tried to settle the matter privately, with Hwang Jung-eum offering to compensate her twice. When those negotiations broke down, the woman filed a criminal complaint for defamation. So a divorce that had started with Hwang Jung-eum trying to expose her husband's alleged affair had now produced a legal case involving someone who had never been part of the marriage. And there was another uncomfortable part to the story. Hwang Jung-eum wasn't wrong that something had gone wrong in her marriage. Reports surrounding her second divorce filing said it followed revelations about Lee Young-don's alleged infidelity. She had reason to believe she was looking at the woman involved. She just had the wrong woman. Then the divorce itself became another legal battle. Hwang Jung-eum filed a civil suit against Lee Young-don seeking around 900 million won that she said she had lent him through a company. Their divorce was finally finalized through court mediation in May 2025. And separately from all of it, she was convicted of embezzling around 4.3 billion won from her own agency, most of it lost in cryptocurrency. She received a 2-year sentence, suspended for 4 years, and did not appeal, so the conviction stands. She was dropped from a variety show and from her endorsements. If you were watching K-dramas through the 2010s, you knew her face. Secret Love, Kill Me, Heal Me. She was pretty. For about a decade, she was one of the most reliably present actresses on Korean television. You don't really see her anymore. All of it started with a marriage falling apart. And somehow, it ended with the wrong woman paying the price for it. That one had an entire country picking through a stranger's Instagram. The last one had an entire fandom branding an actress a boyfriend thief over a relationship that had already ended months earlier. The last one is the biggest, and if you've seen Reply 1988, you already know why it hurt. Hye-ri played Duk-sun, Jun-yeol played Jung-hwan, the boy next door who loved her quietly and never managed to say it in time. People are still arguing about that ending a decade later. Then the two started dating in real life, and it felt like the drama had gone back and fixed itself. Dispatch confirmed the relationship in 2017. Then, in November 2023, both agencies quietly confirmed the breakup. Fans were heartbroken, but the announcement sounded mutual. No public blame, no controversy, just two short statements, and within days, everyone had moved on. 4 months later, one Instagram story would turn that quiet breakup into one of the biggest dating scandals of the year. It started on the 15th of March, when Dispatch published photos of Jun-yeol on holiday in Hawaii with actress Han So-hee. Nobody involved said anything that day, except one person. Hye-ri posted a sunset to her Instagram story with a caption that roughly translated to "interesting." Then she unfollowed him. She never mentioned a name. She never posted a photo directly pointing to anyone. But within hours, the internet had written the rest of the story. 3 words. That's all it took. Less than 24 hours later, to everyone's surprise, Han So-hee addressed those 3 words herself. Instead of waiting for a statement from either agency or from Jun-yeol, she confirmed the relationship on her personal blog. She explained that she'd met Jun-yeol through a photographer friend at an exhibition, then addressed the accusations spreading everywhere, that she'd stolen somebody else's boyfriend. She'd only started seeing him, she said, after his relationship had already ended. And she asked people to stop speculating about a timeline none of them had. Then she posted again, this time addressing Hye-ri directly. She wrote that she'd already apologized privately, but wanted to know what exactly was so interesting about her ex-boyfriend getting a new girlfriend. She deleted the post less than an hour later. Her follow-up was only 6 words. I'm sorry, I have an impatient personality. Then she wiped her blog and locked her Instagram. The public had already reached its verdict. In Korea, there's a term for what many people believed had happened, hwansung-yun-ae, or transfer dating, moving from one relationship straight into another without much of a gap in between. For celebrities, even the accusation can damage a reputation. By that afternoon, Han So-hee was already being called a boyfriend thief across social media. Then Hye-ri spoke, which shed a light on how she reacted. 2 days later, she apologized for the chaos her reaction had caused. Then she revealed something nobody outside the relationship had known. Even after announcing their breakup in November, she and Jun-yeol had agreed they would eventually meet and properly talk everything through. That conversation never happened, which meant that when she found out he'd moved on, she found out the same way everyone else did, through a news article. She later said that, in that moment, she reacted not as Hye-ri the celebrity, but as Hye-ri the person. The apologies continued. Han So-hee returned at the end of March to apologize again for the deleted post, and her agency apologized as well, saying it had failed to look after her properly. And people who knew the couple started briefing reporters, pushing back on the claim that Jun-yeol had led Hye-ri on. 2 weeks after going public, he and Han So-hee broke up. Her agency said they had both decided their work mattered more, and that they'd promised each other not to let their personal lives exhaust them any further. By then, both women had publicly addressed the controversy. The only person people still hadn't heard from was Jun-yeol. He stayed silent. Nearly 2 months passed before he finally addressed the controversy during the press conference for his Netflix series The 8 Show. After nearly 2 months of silence, people expected him to explain everything. Instead, he explained why he'd chosen not to speak. Posts had been written about him without his consent, he said, and he'd decided the best response was not to answer every rumor one by one. Standing beside his castmates, he said he didn't want his personal life to overshadow their work. He called it the hardest period of his career since debuting, and said there would be a better time to explain everything. That time never came. 3 words on a sunset photo. That's all it took to turn a quiet breakup into the biggest dating scandal of the year. every one of these could have stayed private. Most of them nearly did. So tell me which of these you actually remember happening, because a few of them ran for weeks, and I want to know how many of you were watching them unfold in real time. And if you'd rather spend the next 20 minutes on the couples who got it right, click the video on your screen for the K-drama relationships that lasted the longest.